Hello, everyone. I'm here in part two, reading the foreword from the book The Choice by Samuel F. Yette. Now, we just realized that he went through a lot getting this book published. So it's only fair that we read it, take heed to it, and act on it. So I'm going to finish. We ended with Nixon's men could prevent this book from being published, but they did slow it down. So let's take off where we stopped. What was it that so frightened powerful white America? Yette's book, Short on Emotion, told a story of shocking, bitter truths. He showed how the United States during the 1960s was engaged in two simultaneous wars against people of color in Vietnam and here at home. The war against blacks was evolving because technology was rendering this largely unskilled population useless, obsolete. Here you have a people who were brought to these shores because of their economic value. And now, after they were no longer needed to dig the ditches and pick the cotton, there were plans to toss them on a human scrap heap. If that required creating a police state or fashioning a plan of legal genocide with concentration camps and forced sterilizations, then so be it. In essence, Yeti sounded the alarm of genocide, and to sustain it, his cry reached into the labyrinth of the federal government itself. Soon after the murder of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., congressional members of the House Un-American Activities Committee mapped out a strategy to isolate and destroy the black guerrilla fighters and black nationalists. The HUAC plan would seal off the ghetto. No one would be allowed in or out after sundown, and basic constitutional rights would be suspended. President Johnson chose not to take that action. However, liquidation of some so-called radical elements such as the Black Panther Party did begin in the 1970s. Yet he also pulled the cover off the Great Society programs. The masquerade was over. Yet he dug underneath the glowing accounts of radical flourish about a war on poverty and found a Trojan horse. Yes, there were good intentions, and I believe good programs. But Yeti also saw a pacification program not unlike what was being played out in Southeast Asia. Programs such as Job Corps, Community Action, and Vista aided in recruiting a network of community spies. They also swelled corporate coffers and fattened political bureaucracies while making hardly a dent in reducing poverty. Against whom or what then was the war being fought? Genocide can take many forms. Is there enough drastic change in the status of Black Americans or in the character of political leadership to suggest that the choice of legal extension does not exist today? The hard question now is, given today's realities, why would a government need an additional plan of genocide? On one hand, Black fratricide is at such a record pitch, no outside force could pile up more bodies in the morgue or splash more blood on the streets of African Americans than African Americans themselves. And on the other hand, the armed militants, skinheads, klansmen, and other white supremacists are on a rampage, murdering, burning black churches, and recruiting followers. The choice forces us to wonder whether there is not an invisible hand at work. Does the USA need concentration camps when prisons work just as well? And if that is true, is there no other choice than for the black poor and other much maligned magnet groups to go sheep like into the concentration camps, which today are the prisons and jails? Despite the explosive anger of white men, as evident in the Oklahoma City bombing of a federal building, which killed 168 innocents, including 19 children, the Unabomber, and other right wing extremists, blacks are still considered more of a threat than the real enemies within. In the 1970s, Yette could only hint at the devastation that could come from drugs, but he wisely foresaw its deadly potential, comparing it to the opium wars in China. Just as the supposed war against poverty became a war against blacks in some areas, the war against drugs of the 1980s has become an assault on blacks. It is highly suspected that the lines in the 1995 movie about the Black Panthers where black areas were flooded with drugs to desensitize revolutionary action are not fiction. After the drug flow swept the communities, black violence became epidemic. The disintegration of families continued. Crack babies were abandoned in hospitals, and black men were carted off to jail for long prison sentences, some deservingly. Mandatory minimum sentences pushed out more hardened criminals to make room for non-violent drug users who needed drug treatment more than jail cells, but are denied it. And sentences for crack, the drug of choice for the black community, carry penalties 100 times higher than for powdered cocaine, the drug of choice for whites. A study by the National Center of Institutions and Alternatives in Washington, D.C., shows that by the year 2010, with current laws in place, the majority of all black and Hispanic men between the ages of 18 and 40 will be behind bars. Isn't that something? The majority of black men are going to be behind bars. Now, this is 2019. How many in there? 2 million and counting? Thus, the human scrap heap which Yette projected is now in full force. The scenario is tragic, not only because there are more black men in prison than in college, but also because no one knows how many prisoners are innocent, jailed because of selective harassment, planting of evidence, or inept defense. Yet, when you see the invisible hand in motion, shaping predictable psychology outcomes, Yette is correct and continue to sound the alarm. Yette also attempted to wake up the nation to the critical issue of health brutality. Yes, health is major. It's secretive. What do we have in our neighborhoods? Corner stores that sell nothing but death food. food to give you bad health. You have to go so far to get to a grocery store if you don't have transportation. I mean, yes, yes, nutricide. I have a book on that too. How they are killing Black people with nutrition. It is probably one of the most important issues affecting Blacks, although it was not understood when Yette wrote his book and is not sufficiently understood now. Ironically, the lack of access to health care was a gap the Black Panthers was trying to fill before many of them were murdered by the police in cold blood. Black infant mortality is the highest in the industrialized world. TB is raging, and HIV is escalating among the poor. Yet, physicians, pharmacists, and dentists are being jailed, harassed, and run out of Black areas at record rates. The sadly underreported phenomenon is what I call doctor demonition. And it's true. Because when I was growing up, there was doctor offices, dentists, and stuff in our neighborhood. Now, they've been replaced by churches and hair salons and corner stores. Yet he pointed to this trend in the 1970s. It is spreading out of control in the 1990s and it will explode in the year 2000. The demolition is taking place under the auspice of Medicaid's, Medicaid, and Drug Enforcement Administrations. From Dayton, Ohio to Detroit to Jacksonville, selective enforcement and misuse of federal rules are destroying innocent Black physicians. Yet, Yette, Yette has done his job well. He has sounded the alarm. Thus, the cry of genocide today is just as real as when Yette documented it in the 1970s. But now there are more accomplices. Those who spend their time merely planning banquets, selling dinner tickets, dressing for success, watching football games, taking the drugs that were dumped into the Black communities for their destruction, must now know that when history is recorded, the silent will have played a role. Yet, even now, there is still time for revolutionary change. Discipline over drugs, action over avoidance, faith in God over hopelessness can still save us. But right now, too, many of us are sleeping through the counter revolution. Now, that was really hit it really on the nail there, because um, and see, that's one thing that they have going for the ones that are orchestrating this genocide. They can do it because we are silent. We're scared. And then on the other hand, we're too busy having fun. We're too busy having eating food, eating well, and getting drugs. Now these drugs are so powerful that when I heard about how many people died of an overdose over the weekend, I mean, you talking about 6, 7 people dying over the weekend. You know, I even met a lady that came in on my job and was buying shoes to go to her sister's funeral. She overdosed. I mean, it's really bad out here, and I seen the change, but like many of us, was blind. Um, our grandparents, not too long, came off of the plantation, so we were still struggling. We were still in that slave mentality that has been um, handed down. I don't think purposely. Um, and I mean, in our neighborhoods, we had our own businesses. When I was growing up, there was plenty of black-owned businesses, and then it was like overnight they were all gone, and and you go in there and you see these Indians, these Muslims, Japanese, Chinese. I mean, I'm like, what the world? Where did these people come from? And then you don't never see them. Only time you see them is when you walk in the store. They leave your neighborhood and go travel 6, 7, 8 miles to their neighborhood, taking your money with them, putting it in their banks, sending home to their people, while we stuck with these corner stores that don't do nothing for the neighborhood. Okay, well, that is the foreword by Barbara Reynolds. She did a very good job. So, next, we're going to start with the preface. All right, sounding good. I'm loving it. I just can't wait to get in this book again. Thank you.